The moment his wife collapsed, he felt nothing. When the piercing wail of ambulances sliced through the relentless Boston downpour, he still felt no remorse. The regret finally struck him like a physical blow, only when he discovered the note she had slipped into his coat pocket just before she drew her last breath. Declan Ure, a man whose influence stretched across half the city, had dismissed his wife's panic as simple theatrics. He believed she was just complaining, trying to get him to go home early again. He had looked her directly in the eye and demanded she stop ruining his evening. 5 minutes after his harsh words, she was gone forever. But the terrible truth behind her death was destined to dismantle his entire empire, revealing that the woman who shared his bed for 10 years had been a total stranger to him. This is not merely a story of lost love, it is a confession. This story will remind you that the people closest to you may be fighting battles you know nothing about. It is a powerful lesson about what happens when we ignore the ones who love us the most, and the devastating price of taking someone for granted. Stay until the very end, because the final twist will leave you absolutely speechless. The magnificent crystal chandeliers of the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel did not seem to sparkle for Declan Ure. Instead, they seemed to glare down at him with accusation. The grand ballroom felt suffocating and thick with the combined scents of overpriced lilies, roasting duck, and the raw, hungry ambition radiating from Boston's political class. Declan meticulously adjusted the cuffs on his Brioni suit, his sharp eyes methodically sweeping the crowded room like a predator confined in an opulent cage. At 38 years old, Declan was the unchallenged ruler of the New England criminal underworld. While his official tax documents identified him as a simple logistics consultant for ore shipping, his true purpose for attending the charity gala was far from philanthropic. He was there to finalize a critical agreement with the Albanians, a deal that would grant him control over the immensely profitable shipping lanes running through the port of Newark. Declan, a voice called his name, so soft it was nearly lost beneath the rattle of fine silverware and a string quartet performing Vivaldi. It was Gloria. He did not bother to look down at her. His gaze remained locked on a bald man standing on the other side of the room. That man was Victor Costa. Not right now, Gloria. Declan, please, she urged in a whisper. Her hand, which was usually so composed, clenched his bicep with an unexpected force that momentarily startled him. We have to leave this place. Something feels terribly wrong. At last, Declan deigned to glance down at his wife. Gloria Ure was the very picture of old-world, high-society elegance. She was adorned in a flowing, emerald-colored gown that highlighted her fair complexion and raven hair. She was the beautiful prize he had acquired 10 years earlier, the daughter of a disgraced and bankrupt industrialist. She was exquisite, quiet, and most importantly, she was almost always perfectly obedient. On this night, however, her face was ashen, and tiny beads of sweat had formed along her hairline. "You are causing a scene," Declan murmured, his face fixed in a polite smile for the sake of a nearby senator who was observing them. The tone of his voice, however, was as cold and hard as steel. "Costa will be walking over here in less than 5 minutes. Pull yourself together." "My heart," she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "It is beating too fast. Declan, I cannot seem to catch my breath." Declan let out a sharp, impatient sigh through his nose. He had navigated her episodes of anxiety in the past. They invariably flared up whenever he had important business to conduct. In his mind, it was her subtle method of asserting control, of tugging on his leash. "Go to the powder room," he hissed under his breath, forcefully prying her fingers from his arm. "Go splash some cold water on your face and reapply your lipstick." "No, you are not listening to me." "Stop ruining my night," Declan finally snapped. The words came out louder than he had intended. A few people at the adjacent table turned their heads in their direction. Declan felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. He glared down at her, his blue eyes turning a shade darker. "I am about to close a deal that will secure this family's future for the next 3 generations. Either go sit down or go wait in the car. Just get out of my sight until you can behave like the wife of a Mafia don should." Gloria stared back at him. The look on her face was not one of fear, nor was it one of anger. It was an expression of deep, soul-crushing sorrow. Her lips parted, as if she meant to say something more, but she seemed to swallow the words back down. "Okay," she whispered softly. "Okay, Declan." With that, she turned and walked away from him, her emerald gown flowing behind her like a trail of dark, rippling water. Declan watched her depart, a flicker of annoyance mingling with an odd, sudden chill that settled deep in his stomach. He quickly dismissed the feeling. He intercepted a passing waiter and took a glass of champagne from the tray, turning on his practiced charm just as Victor Costa approached him. "Mr. Ur," Costa rumbled, his accent thick and heavy. "Your wife, she appears to be leaving." "A headache," Declan lied without missing a beat. "Women, you understand how they can be, do you not?" Costa tapped his own glass against Declan's. "To the future. To the future." Declan raised the glass to his lips and took a sip. The expensive champagne tasted like bitter acid on his tongue. 3 minutes later, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the elegant ballroom. This was not a polite gasp of surprise. It was a raw, guttural cry of pure terror, originating from the direction of the hotel's grand staircase. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. An eerie, profound silence descended upon the entire room, immediately followed by the distinct sound of shattering glass. Declan's drink fell from his hand. He did not know why, but his body was in motion before his mind could process what was happening. He roughly shoved a senator aside, sent a waiter sprawling, and sprinted with all his might toward the foyer. A tight circle of guests had already formed. "Give her some space. Someone call 911. Declan brutally forced his way through the wall of tuxedo-clad men. "Move. Get out of my way, or I will kill every last one of you." He finally broke through into the center of the gathering. Gloria was sprawled on the cold marble floor. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the ornate frescoed ceiling above, but they were seeing nothing at all. Her skin was already taking on an alarming grayish hue. A small trail of white foam was beginning to seep from the corner of her mouth. Gloria. Declan dropped to his knees, his expensive shoes sliding on the slick, polished stone. He seized her by the shoulders. They were completely limp in his grasp. Gloria. "Hey, look at me now." There was only silence. Gloria. He shook her more forcefully this time. Her head fell back, striking the hard floor with a dull, sickening sound. A man in a tuxedo, a cardiac surgeon named Dr. Halloway, whom Declan recognized from his club, was already trying to find a pulse. He looked up at Declan, his face stark white. "Declan," Halloway began, his voice shaking. "She is gone." "Fix her," Declan snarled, grabbing the doctor violently by his lapels. "Start CPR on her. Do it right now. There is no pulse. Her airway is completely obstructed. This looks like severe anaphylaxis." Or, "I said fix her!" Declan screamed, the raw sound of his voice echoing off the high ceilings like the cry of a wounded animal. He began performing chest compressions himself. 1, 2, 3. He pushed down with all his strength until he felt the delicate bones of her ribs crack beneath his hands. "Come on, Gloria. Do not you dare do this. Do not you dare do this to me. Stop ruining my night." His own cruel words began to play over and over in his mind, a relentless, torturous loop. "Stop ruining my night." "Sir," a security guard said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Declan spun around in a blur, pulling the Sig Sauer P229 from the holster at his waist. The crowd gasped and scrambled backward in terror. "Do not touch me. Get an ambulance." "They are here, boss," his bodyguard Kieran said in a calm voice, stepping directly into the path of the gun. Kieran gently but firmly pushed the barrel downward. "The paramedics are right here. You have to let them do their work." Declan staggered back onto his heels, watching helplessly as the emergency medical team surrounded his wife. They intubated her. They administered epinephrine. They used the defibrillator to shock her heart. The line on the portable monitor remained stubbornly, unnervingly flat. The time was 9:42 p.m. Just 10 minutes ago, she had begged him to leave. Only 5 minutes ago, he had cruelly dismissed her pleas. Now, she was a lifeless body on the opulent floor of the Fairmont. As the paramedics prepared to load her onto a stretcher, Declan noticed a faint glint on the marble floor where she had fallen. It was her clutch purse. Its contents had spilled out: a tube of lipstick, a compact mirror, and a small, neatly folded piece of hotel stationery. Feeling completely numb, Declan reached out a trembling hand and picked up the piece of paper. He slowly unfolded it. It was not a suicide note. It was not a simple grocery list. It was a list of names. And there, at the very top, written in her elegant, familiar cursive, was the name Victor Costa. Right next to it was a time, 9:45 p.m. She knew. She had known something terrible was going to happen at 9:45. She had been trying to get him out of there to save him. Declan lifted his gaze and looked across the chaotic lobby, toward the main exit. Victor Costa was standing there, watching the scene unfold. He was not looking at Gloria's body. He was looking directly at Declan, and for one chilling, unforgettable second, the bald Russian smiled. The rain falling outside Massachusetts General Hospital was a relentless torrent, washing the city of Boston in a drab, miserable film. Inside the exclusive private waiting room on the hospital's top floor, the air was uncomfortably sterile and cold. Declan remained seated in a hard plastic chair, his $5,000 suit now soiled with vomit and grime from the hotel's floor. He had not uttered a single word in over 3 hours. Kieran, who was his brother in every way that mattered, and his undisputed second-in-command, stood guard by the door. He was on his phone, barking out commands to their soldiers on the streets. "I want the South End on complete lockdown. Nobody moves any product. Nobody speaks to the Russians. If Costa so much as breathes in the wrong direction, I want to know about it." Kieran ended the call and walked over. "Declan, the police are downstairs. Detective Miller is demanding a statement." "Tell Miller he can go to hell," Declan replied, his voice sounding distant, as if it were coming from another room entirely. "Where is the medical examiner? Dr. Orris is just finishing up her work now. Declan, you need to start preparing yourself for what she might say." If this was a hit, it was a hit, Kieran. Declan finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot and circled with a darkness that sent a chill through his trusted lieutenant. She did not have any kind of heart condition. She practiced yoga 5 times a week. She only ate organic food. She was only 32 years old. The door to the waiting room swung open. Dr. Orris, the chief medical examiner, a woman Declan had paid off on 3 separate occasions in the past to make his problems vanish, entered the room. She was holding a clipboard, and she looked visibly shaken. "Mr. Orr," she began, carefully maintaining a safe distance from him. "Tell me," Declan commanded. "It was not a heart attack," Orris stated quietly. "It was not an allergic reaction to something in the food either." "Then what was it?" "Tetrodotoxin," Orris answered. "It is a poison derived from pufferfish, extremely concentrated, but it was modified somehow. It was combined with a dermal agent." Declan's brow furrowed in confusion. "Dermal? You mean she was touched?" "Yes, it was absorbed through her skin. The substance acts within minutes. It causes paralysis of the diaphragm, which is then followed by a full cardiac arrest." Orris flipped to the next page on her clipboard. "We discovered a significant residue of the substance on her right hand, concentrated specifically on her palm." Declan shut his eyes, his mind replaying the moment in the ballroom. She had grabbed his arm so tightly. "Declan, please." "Did she make contact with anyone else?" Kieran asked. "She touched me," Declan whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked down at his own suit jacket. "She grabbed my arm." "Wait a minute," Kieran said, stepping forward. If the poison was on her hand, then why is Declan not dead as well? Dr. Orris adjusted her glasses nervously. That is the truly strange part. The poison was apparently encapsulated within a lipid layer, perhaps some kind of cream or an oil. It requires approximately 5 minutes to fully absorb through the pores and become lethal. If she applied it herself, or if someone applied it to her, she effectively had a timer placed on her own life. Declan shot up from his chair. She would never apply it to herself. Someone put it on her, or Oris hesitated for a moment, or she touched an object that had been coated with it. Declan's mind was racing, connecting the dots. The clutch purse, the champagne glass, a door handle. The car, Declan said suddenly. The handle of the Maybach. She always opened her own door. What about the driver tonight? Where is he? Kieran's face turned white. Enzo is outside with the vehicle, he answered. Get him to the warehouse, Declan commanded, his profound grief hardening into a rage so intense it felt like a chemical high coursing through his veins. And I want you to torch the car. Declan, we really need to think about this carefully, I said. You bring him to me, Declan roared, violently flipping the heavy hospital table. My wife is gone because she opened a car door that was intended for me. Kieran, that poison was meant for me. She was the one who touched the handle first. The terrible realization struck him with the force of a physical impact. Gloria had not simply passed away. She had taken his place in death. But that still did not make sense of the note. Declan dug into his coat pocket, pulling out the piece of crumpled hotel stationery. The note said Victor Costa, at 9:45 in the evening. If the poison had been on the handle of the car door, she would have absorbed it long before they even walked into the hotel. Yet she did not collapse until an hour later. Dr. Orris, Declan said, his voice becoming dangerously composed. How long does a poison like this take to work? A maximum of 5 to 10 minutes. We were inside at the party for a full hour, Declan stated, so it could not have been the car. That means she must have touched the source somewhere inside the hotel, Kieran concluded. A drinking glass? Maybe a handrail? No, Declan said, shaking his head. She grabbed my arm for support. She was already feeling the effects at that point. That tells me she was poisoned approximately 5 minutes before she came to talk to me. Who was she with? Kieran pressed. Right before she found you. Declan struggled to recall. His attention had been entirely fixed on Costa. He had not been watching Gloria at all. He had been neglecting her. I do not know, Declan confessed, the guilt rising in his throat like a bitter acid. I was not paying attention. We will get the security tapes, Kieran promised. The Fairmont is covered in cameras. Get it done. Declan turned to walk away. I am going home. Home? Declan, you cannot. It is not safe there. If an assassin is using poison, then I have to get to her office, Declan explained, referring to the note. She knew that Costa was planning to make a move at 9:45. She had intelligence on it. Kieran, my wife, a woman who fills her days with shopping and tending to her garden, had specific intel on a Russian hit before I ever did. Declan strode out of the hospital room, the back of his long coat sweeping behind him like a cape. I did not even know her, Kieran. I shared a home with her for a decade, and I did not know the woman at all. The Orc family estate in Brooklyn was nothing less than a modern fortress. It was surrounded by high walls, patrolled by armed guards, and the grounds were kept in an unnerving silence. Declan entered the master bedroom. The air still carried the scent of lavender mixed with expensive vanilla, her signature fragrance. Her fine silk robe was draped casually over the chaise lounge. The book she was reading, a dense historical biography, rested on the nightstand, a bookmark placed neatly halfway through the chapters. The entire room felt like a museum exhibit dedicated to a life that was suddenly cut short. Declan walked over to her vanity table, a collection of perfume bottles, lotions, and jewelry spread across its surface. He pulled open the top drawer, It contained nothing more than hair ties and bottles of vitamins. He then moved to the large walk-in closet. Inside were endless rows of designer shoes. "Where did you hide everything, Gloria?" he whispered into the silent, empty room. "You were aware of names, you were aware of times. Where did you keep your notes?" He began to tear the closet apart in his desperation. He pulled down storage boxes from the shelves, frantically ripping through the pockets of her coats and jackets. He found nothing. Utterly defeated, he slumped against the wall, sliding all the way down to the polished floor. He buried his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a deep, body-rattling sob that convulsed his entire frame. The image of her face, pleading with him to leave the party, was burned into the back of his eyelids. "Stop ruining my night. I am so sorry," he choked out between ragged breaths. "I am so incredibly sorry." As he grieved, his hand struck the floorboard beside him. It produced a strange, hollow sound. Declan stopped crying. He knocked on the wood a second time. Thump, thump. It was definitely hollow. He wiped the tears from his eyes and retrieved a small pocket knife from his suit. He forced the blade into the thin gap in the hardwood floor, just beneath the shoe rack, and carefully pried it upward. A loose panel came free. Hidden underneath was a small black metal lock box. Declan lifted it out of the hidden compartment. It was secured with a combination code. He tried the numbers of her birthday. An error message flashed. He entered the date of their anniversary. Another error. He paused for a long moment, thinking hard. He then tried the date they first met. Click. The small box popped open. There was no jewelry inside. There was no hidden cash. Instead, there were 3 computer hard drives, a thick stack of photographs, and a journal bound in dark leather. Declan picked up the journal and opened it. The very first entry was dated 4 years in the past, on August the 12th. Declan believes he successfully hid the shipment from the federal agents. He is wrong. I was the one who paid off Agent Miller's partner to make the evidence disappear. It cost me $50,000 from our household account. I recorded it in the budget as kitchen renovations. Declan did not even notice. He never notices anything. Declan felt his breath catch in his chest. He quickly flipped to the next page. November the 4th. Kieran is skimming money from the top. I discovered the ledger he maintains on his second phone. He has been taking 5% of all the casino profits. I cannot bring myself to tell Declan yet. Knowing this would absolutely break his heart. I need to find a way to fix this on my own. Declan felt a cold dread wash over him. Kieran, his own brother. He turned frantically to the very last entry. It was dated for today. They are making a plan to kill him tonight. I overheard Costa speaking on the phone in the ladies' lounge at Saks Fifth Avenue. He was speaking in Russian. He assumed no one could understand him, but he is mistaken. My grandmother taught me the language. They plan to use a binary agent. One part will be delivered in the handshake, the other part will be in his drink. If Declan shakes Costa's hand and then sips the champagne, he will die. I have to find a way to stop him. I must get him out of there. If that is not possible, I have to intercept the poisoned drink myself. Declan let the journal fall from his hands. The handshake. He remembered that Costa had shaken his hand firmly. The drink. Declan had taken a glass of champagne, but he had dropped it to the floor when Gloria suddenly screamed his name. He then understood, with a sick and twisting horror, exactly what had happened. Gloria had not been poisoned by an accidental touch. She had deliberately intercepted the poison meant for him. He remembered her taking a small sip from a champagne flute just moments before she approached him. He had assumed at the time that it was her own drink. But if she knew, she must have taken the glass that was intended for him. She either drank from it to confirm it was poisoned, or to dispose of it, or simply because she knew he would drink it if she failed to act. She did not just die for him. She had committed suicide in order to save his life. And the last thing he ever said to her was, "Stop ruining my night." Declan slowly rose to his feet. The crushing grief was completely gone. In its place was a cold, mechanical hunger for absolute violence. He took out his phone and dialed the one number he knew he could still trust. It was not Kieran's. The journal made it clear that Kieran was skimming. He called the head of his cleanup crew, a man by the name of Silas. Wait. Silas is forbidden. A man named Vance is forbidden. He dialed the number for Rocco, his chief enforcer. Rocco, Declan said, his voice now entirely stripped of any human emotion. Get the boys ready. We are not just going to war against the Russians. Who is the target, boss? Everyone, Declan replied, his voice like ice. And I want you to bring me Kieran, alive. The warehouse in South Boston was filled with the smells of saltwater brine, rusted metal, and old dried blood. It was the kind of place where screams did not create an echo. Instead, they were swallowed up by the decaying wood of the walls and the thick, damp air that rolled in from the nearby harbor. Declan was seated on a folding metal chair positioned in the middle of the huge, empty floor. He had taken off his suit jacket, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. His hands looked clean, but he felt a stain on his soul, a kind of grime that he knew would never wash away. In front of him, securely fastened to a wooden chair with thick zip ties, was Kieran. Kieran Duffy had been Declan's closest friend since they were both 6 years old, back when they used to steal apples together from the neighborhood market. They had climbed the ranks of the organization side by side. Declan had always been the strategic mind and the public face. Kieran was supposed to be the muscle and the unwavering loyalty, or at least that is what Declan had always believed. Kieran's face was already showing bruises. Rocco had handled the initial preparations, a few hard punches to the stomach to soften him up, along with a cracked rib to ensure every breath was an exercise in pain. Yet Kieran had remained silent. He just continued to stare at Declan with an expression that was a mix of deep confusion and profound hurt. "Why are you doing this, Dec?" Kieran wheezed out, spitting a small amount of blood onto the dirty concrete floor. "My wife is at home right now. She is waiting up for me." "Your wife?" "My God, Dec. Gloria was just killed. We are supposed to be out there hunting down the Russians, not doing whatever this is." Declan did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He simply reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the leather-bound journal. He then tossed it onto the damp floor, right at Kieran's feet. Kieran looked down at the object. A flicker of recognition appeared in his eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of his pupils. He managed to conceal it almost instantly. "What is that thing?" Kieran asked. "That is her diary," Declan replied, his voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "On August the 12th, you skimmed $50,000. On November the 4th, you took 5% of the casino revenue. You keep a detailed ledger of it on your second phone. Do you want me to have Rocco come back in here and find that phone for me, Kieran? Or would you prefer to just tell me why you have been consistently stealing from me while smiling to my face?" Kieran's jaw clenched tightly. The mask of the loyal soldier finally shattered, replaced by a look that was both desperate and exhausted. "I did not steal that money from you," Kieran said in a quiet voice. "I was trying to save you." Declan shot up from his seat and kicked Kieran's chair with tremendous force. Kieran and the chair crashed hard onto the floor. The impact sent them skidding across the concrete. Kieran groaned in pain, his cheek now pressed against the cold, wet floor. "Saving me!" Declan finally shouted, his tight control beginning to slip away. "You purchased a beach house out on the Cape. You bought a brand new Porsche for that mistress of yours. Do not you dare lie to my face." "I was paying the tribute," Kieran screamed back, his voice muffled by the floor. "I was paying the commission." Declan froze in place. He gave a subtle signal to Rocco, who had been standing quietly in the shadows, to lift the chair back to an upright position. Rocco quickly hauled Kieran up. "What commission are you talking about?" Declan asked, his voice now dangerously soft. Kieran gasped, struggling to catch his breath as blood dripped from his nose. "Do you honestly believe you run all of New England just because you are smart?" Do you think your shipping operations go untouched because the federal agents are all incompetent? Kieran let out a laugh. It was a wet, gurgling sound. You are untouched, Declan, because we pay a tax. We pay a tax to the commission based in New York. The five families. They made a decision to expand their territory into Boston 3 years ago. Their plan was to completely wipe you out. Declan felt a wave of dizziness as the room seemed to spin around him. I have never paid a single dime to anyone in New York. No, Kieran confirmed. You have not. But I have. I skimmed that money specifically to pay them off. I did it so you could continue to play the role of the king, all without ever knowing that you were really just a vassal state. I took the hit to your pride so that you would never have to bend the knee to them. Declan stared at his friend, his mind reeling. It all made a terrible kind of sense. The unexplained peace treaties, the way the federal investigations would suddenly back off. And what about Gloria? Declan asked, his voice trembling. Did she know about this? Kieran averted his gaze. A dark, unreadable shadow fell across his face. Declan, Gloria was aware of everything. She understood the situation long before I ever did. Declan said that she wrote about you skimming from the top. Kieran replied with bitterness in his voice. She did not write anything about a tribute. The reason is that she never trusted me. She was convinced that I was stealing the money for myself. She came at me about it last year. Right in her own kitchen, she held a gun to my head while she was in the middle of making risotto. Could you even picture that? Your sweet wife, the one who organizes charity balls, pressed a Glock against my temple. She told me if I ever took from you again, she would personally bury my body under her rose bushes. Declan's thoughts raced back to Gloria, remembering how she would quietly listen to his business calls as she arranged flowers, recalling the way she would gently rub his shoulders when he was dealing with stress. She held a gun to his head. I explained to her that I was paying the commission, Kieran went on, but she refused to believe me. Or perhaps she did believe me and simply did not care. She ordered me to take care of the problem. She said it. Kieran swallowed, the memory clearly painful. She said that Declan must always remain the king. If he ever discovered that he was just a puppet, the truth would completely break him. Declan felt a single tear trace a path down his cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was born from a sharp, piercing awareness of his own profound inadequacy. His own wife and his closest friend had been secretly running his entire empire behind his back, all just to shield his fragile ego. But in this moment, Declan moved closer. He asked, The Russians, Kosta? Did you know about the poison? Kieran looked up, his gaze now clear and filled with a terrifying honesty. No, I swear it on my mother's grave, Declan. My business is with money. I do not get involved with the Russians. Kosta is a complete wild dog. If he made a move on you, he did it all on his own. Gloria knew, Declan whispered, his voice barely audible. She left me a note. She knew Costa was planning to kill me at 9:45. Then she must have had sources that I do not have access to, Kieran said urgently. Declan, you have to listen to me. Your wife was not just protecting you from threats. She was operating on a strategic level that we cannot even begin to comprehend. When I presented her with the commission's demands, she actually laughed. She told me, I will handle New York. And just 2 weeks after that, the demand for the tax was suddenly cut by half. Declan began to pace the floor of the room. How? How could she possibly do that? I have no idea, Kieran cried out. She was just the daughter of some bankrupt machinery salesman. She had no reason to know any of this, but somehow, she did. She was truly terrifying, Declan stopped his pacing. He turned and looked directly at Kieran. And he believed him. He believed that Kieran had been skimming the money only to pay the tax. He believed that, in his own way, Kieran loved him. But Kieran had still kept these enormous secrets from him. And in the world Declan inhabited, secrets were always fatal. You should have come to me, Declan said, his voice quiet and soft. I was trying to protect you. No, Declan corrected him. You were managing me. Both of you were. Declan then walked over to the table and picked up his pistol. He carefully checked the chamber. Deck! Kieran's eyes grew wide with panic. Deck, please do not do this. We can fix this situation. We can go after Costa together. I can no longer trust you, Kieran, Declan stated, his voice now completely empty of any emotion. You allowed me to walk into a room with a known Russian assassin, all because you were too preoccupied with balancing the books for New York. If you had just told me about the threats, I would have been prepared for them. Gloria would still be alive. That is not fair, Kieran screamed in protest. Nothing in this world is fair, Declan replied. He raised the gun. Wait, the hard drives, Kieran shouted, pulling hard against his restraints. Did you remember to check the encryption keys? Declan hesitated for a moment. What are you talking about? She asked me for encryption keys 2 months ago, Kieran explained, speaking very fast. They were top-level, military-grade keys. She told me she was storing insurance. If she is really dead, Declan, then whatever information is on those drives is the only thing in the world that matters now. It is not just about money. It is about leverage. That is the real reason Costa killed her. Declan lowered his weapon just slightly. Why would Costa murder her for leverage? Maybe he never intended to kill you, Kieran gasped, trying to catch his breath. Maybe the poison was meant for her all along. Declan froze completely. The note clearly said, Victor Costa. 9:45 p.m. The poison was delivered through the handshake. But if Gloria was aware of the poison, why did she choose to intercept it? Why did she not just inform security? Why did she not tell Declan to stop the handshake? Because she had to die. The idea was insane, completely impossible, yet it embedded itself in Declan's mind like a sharp splinter of wood. You are right, Declan finally said. The drives. Let me help you crack them, Kieran pleaded. I know the kinds of algorithms she preferred to use. Please, Dec. Declan looked at his friend. He could see the raw fear, but he also recognized the man's utility. For the time being, Kieran was useful. Rocco, Declan commanded, turning his back completely on Kieran. Cut him loose. Rocco paused, uncertain. Boss, I said cut him down. Get him a laptop computer. If he fails to crack those drives within 1 hour, you will put a bullet in his head. Declan walked out of the warehouse, stepping into the cold, rainy night. He needed fresh air. He desperately needed to think. And more than anything else, he needed to find the one person who might hold the answers he was looking for. He needed to see the man Gloria had been meeting with every single Tuesday for the past 3 years, according to her personal journal. A man by the name of Father Thomas. St. Jude's Church in the North End was an old and drafty building that smelled of beeswax and old incense. The church doors were open at 2 in the morning, a courtesy always extended for men with dirty money. Declan's heavy boots cracked against the cold stone as he moved down the main aisle. He had no faith in gods or sermons. His world was governed by simple equations of action and consequence, of a trigger pulled and a life ended. Gloria, however, had always played the part of a true believer. He saw Father Thomas in the very first row, his gaze fixed on the suffering Christ above the altar. The priest was an older man, perhaps 60 years of age, with a fringe of white hair and knuckles that were thick and scarred from a life before the cloth. I was wondering when you would arrive, Declan, the priest said, his voice calm, his back still turned. Declan froze a few pews away. So you heard. It is all over the television. Father Thomas slowly got to his feet. The priest finally faced him, his eyes heavy with an ancient exhaustion. Boston's Queen, found lifeless at the Fairmont Hotel. It is a profound loss. Declan closed the distance between them, his fingers brushing the cool steel of his weapon. Save the sermon, Father. I read her diary. It mentioned you. Every single Tuesday, right here, for confession. He leaned in closer. The thing is, Gloria was spotless, a complete saint. So tell me what secrets you two were really sharing. A faint, sorrowful smile touched Father Thomas's lips. Gloria was burdened by many sins, Declan. The difference is that they all belong to you. What are you talking about? The priest moved gracefully toward the altar. She prayed for your soul. She confessed your violent acts so you could find some peace in your sleep. But our meetings were about more than prayer. His hand slipped beneath the fine linen on the altar. When it emerged, he was holding a small, ornate silver key. She instructed me to give this to you in the event that she died, Thomas said, holding the key out to him. Declan took it from his hand. It felt heavy. What does this key open? Number 44, Beacon Street, the basement apartment. Declan frowned. Beacon Street was known as one of the most expensive and exclusive addresses in the entire city. She was renting an apartment there. She owned the entire building, Father Thomas corrected him, through a discreet shell company. She referred to it as the library. Declan gripped the key tightly in his hand. Who was she, Thomas? Who was she really? The priest looked directly into Declan's eyes. She was the person who worked tirelessly to keep the monsters away from your door. Declan, you were the one who built the walls, but she was the one who manned the watchtower. And she was tired. She was very, very tired. Did she know that Costa was going to make a move on us? She knew that Costa was coming, Thomas confirmed. She came to see me yesterday. She told me that she had to make a very difficult choice. A trade. What kind of trade? Your life in exchange for the network, Thomas stated cryptically. She explained that Costa had discovered the existence of the library. He was planning to expose it all, to expose her, and if he did that, the Commission, the Feds, and the Russians would all descend upon you. They would not come just to kill you, but to completely dismantle every single thing you have ever built. She said that the only possible way to close the loop for good was to remove the leverage. She was the leverage, Declan realized with a sudden, chilling clarity. She was the spy, Thomas said. And spies do not ever get to retire, Declan. They just get burned. Declan turned around to leave, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. Declan, the priest called out just as he reached the door. Declan stopped in his tracks. She truly loved you, Thomas said. That was the one and only thing she never, ever lied about. She loved you so much that she was willing to become something she hated. Declan did not take the Maybach. Instead, he hailed a taxi to Beacon Hill, pulling the brim of his hat down low over his eyes. He could no longer be certain he could trust his own drivers. The building at 44 Beacon Street was a large brownstone mansion, appearing dark and imposing in the night. Declan used the small silver key on the side service door. It clicked open without a sound. He stepped into a very narrow hallway that led down a set of stairs to the basement. The air down here was filtered, feeling cool and perfectly dry. There was none of the usual smell of a damp basement. At the bottom of the staircase stood a solid steel door equipped with a keypad. Declan stared at it for a moment. He did not have a code. Then he remembered her journal and the date they first met. He punched in the numbers, 10, 14, 12. A small light on the panel turned green. The heavy steel door hissed open. Declan stepped inside, and he gasped. It was not an apartment at all. It was a complete command center. Banks of powerful servers hummed steadily against the far wall. 4 massive monitors displayed live video feeds, showing not just their own warehouses, but also the Russian social club, the police commissioner's private office, and even the interior of the Italian mob boss's restaurant in the North End. My God, Declan whispered to himself in disbelief. In the very center of the room was a large glass desk, and sitting behind it was a woman. She was definitely not Gloria. She was much younger, maybe 25 years old, with short, spiked blonde hair and a full sleeve of tattoos covering one of her arms. She was typing furiously on a keyboard. She did not even look up when Declan walked into the room. "You are late," the woman said. Her voice was sharp and American, but it had a certain cadence that suggested she spoke other languages as well. "Who are you?" Declan asked as he raised his gun. "You can put that away, boss man," the woman said, finally spinning her chair around to face him. My name is Vivian. I am the one who runs all the technology. Gloria was the strategist for the operation. You are the muscle. We have a great deal of work to do. You worked for my wife? I worked with your wife, Vivian corrected her sharply. She pulled me out of a hacker black site in Romania about 5 years ago. I have been running her surveillance network ever since that day. Declan slowly lowered his gun, his mind reeling from the shock. Surveillance on who? He asked. On everyone, Vivian said, gesturing with her hand toward the wall of screens. How do you think you managed to win the port contract last year? We blackmailed the city councilman. Senator, how exactly did you evade the RICO indictment back in 2021? The answer was simple. We wiped the emails clean from the server. Gloria was the one truly running this city for the last 5 years. Declan, you were nothing more than the handsome face they put on campaign posters. A wave of nausea washed over Declan. He felt insignificant, powerless. But then the anger started to boil inside him again. This time it was hotter, more intense. She is gone, Declan stated, his voice flat. Costa was the one who killed her. I am aware of that, Vivian replied. For just a moment her confident facade cracked, and her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. We have the audio from that night. She was wearing a wire, Declan. She made it a habit to always wear a wire. She was actively recording everything. She was transmitting in real time, Vivian explained. She tapped a single key on her keyboard. Would you like to listen to it? The final 5 minutes of her life? Declan could only nod, his throat too tight to form words. Vivian hit the play button. A crackle erupted from the speakers, followed by the familiar sounds of the party, the distinct clinking of glasses and the low thrum of music. Then, Gloria's voice emerged, perfectly clear, yet spoken in a hushed tone. I have reached the bar. Costa is positioned at my 3 o'clock. He is currently speaking with his bodyguard. A brief silence followed. He just passed a small object to the waiter. It was a vial. That vial is being emptied into the champagne. They are pouring the vintage Ballinger. That particular bottle is Declan's absolute favorite. They are aware. Vivian stopped the playback. She could see the devastation on his face. Keep it playing, Declan rasped, the words tearing from his throat. The recording started again. There is no way I can reach Declan in time without making a major scene. If I create a disturbance, Costa will immediately activate his backup plan. There is a sniper on the balcony. I can see the glint of the laser sight. If Declan tries to leave, he will be shot. If he remains and sips his drink, he will be poisoned. The strength vanished from Declan's legs and his knees buckled. He gripped the heavy desk to keep from falling. A sniper. That was the reason she couldn't just pull him away from the party. She was completely trapped with no way out. There is only a single path to clear the entire board, Gloria's voice whispered through the speakers, a ghostly echo. I am the one who has to take that drink. If I collapse in the center of this room, the resulting chaos will effectively cancel the assassination attempt. A sniper will never take a shot into a panicked crowd. Security will swarm the area instantly. Declan will survive. A long, painful silence stretched on the recording, followed by a shaky, indrawn breath. I am so sorry, Declan. I am truly so sorry. I can only hope you manage to find the journal. I hope that you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Then came the sound of her determined footsteps, and the sound of her voice politely requesting the champagne flute. A soft click echoed as Vivian halted the recording. The room was utterly silent, except for the low, constant hum of the computer servers. Declan just stood there, letting the horrifying truth wash over him like a tide of acid. She was not trying to scold him. She had not been trying to spoil his evening. She had calculated the one and only mathematical possibility that allowed him to survive, and the terrible price of that equation was her own life. She had knowingly walked toward her own execution, and she had done it with a smile on her face. She saved your life, Vivian said, her voice gentle. But in doing so, She also provided us with a powerful weapon. What kind of weapon? Declan demanded, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. The binary agent, Vivian stated plainly. The specific poison that Costa deployed. It is exceptionally rare, an experimental compound that is manufactured by a single private laboratory in Switzerland. We were able to trace the original purchase order. Vivian brought a document up on the massive central screen. It was not purchased by Costa, Vivian revealed. The acquisition was made by Caldwell Enterprises. Declan's brow furrowed in confusion. Arthur Caldwell, the powerful real estate mogul. The very same man, Vivian confirmed. Costa is simply the muscle for hire, a disposable tool. Caldwell is the person who truly desires the port. He has grand plans to construct his extravagant luxury waterfront casino, and your shipping containers are a direct obstruction to his goal. He contracted the Russians to permanently remove you. Declan stared blankly at the screen. Arthur Caldwell was a man he had played golf with on several occasions, a man who had sent a bouquet of flowers to their home just this morning. Caldwell believes he is completely invulnerable, Declan said with disgust. He parades around thinking he is a respectable businessman. He is, Vivian corrected, and that is precisely why you cannot get to him. He has the state governor securely in his pocket. If you were to kill him, the National Guard would be deployed on the streets of Boston within the hour. Declan turned his gaze to the imposing wall of monitors. He looked at the vast, hidden empire that his wife had constructed in secret. He looked at the capable woman who had been her partner in building it. Gloria did not assemble all of this merely to survive, Declan observed slowly, the realization dawning on him. She assembled it so she could win. Exactly, Vivian confirmed, a fierce and dangerous smile spreading across her face. So, tell me, boss, do you want to sit here and mourn? Or do you want to systematically burn Arthur Caldwell's entire life to the ground, piece by painful piece, until he is on his knees begging you to end his suffering? Declan deliberately buttoned his suit jacket. He wiped the stray tears from his cheeks with the back of his hand. The grief was now sealed away, locked inside the same cold box where he kept his heart. The only thing that remained was the coming war. Vivian, Declan commanded, his voice now devoid of emotion. Download every piece of data you have on Caldwell. I want bank accounts, known mistresses, private emails, every dirty secret. I want absolutely everything. And then, Declan continued, walking purposefully toward the door, we are going to arrange a very special dinner party, and I will be the one pouring the champagne. Revenge, Declan came to understand, was not a meal that was best served cold. It was a meal that was best served methodically, one course at a time, until the intended target finally choked on the injustice of it all. For the next 3 days, Declan never once left the basement command center located at 44 Beacon Street. He found sleep on a small cot tucked away in the corner. He sustained himself on takeout noodles that Vivian would order for him. To the entire world outside, he had effectively become a ghost. Arthur Caldwell was a celebrated pillar of Boston society. He held a prestigious seat on the board of the Museum of Fine Arts. He was publicly known as the single largest donor to the governor's re-election campaign. He was completely untouchable by the instruments of the law because he was, in essence, the law's personal wallet. He is dangerously over-leveraged, Vivian announced, pointing to an incredibly complex web of offshore accounts that were displayed on the large center monitor. Caldwell Enterprises is nothing more than a house of cards. He borrowed an enormous sum from the Chinese triads to finance the waterfront development project. He gave them his word that he would grant them access to the port. That is the real reason he needs you out of the picture. If he fails to deliver on the shipping routes by the 1st of the month, the triads will declare him in default. And their method of foreclosure does not involve lawyers. They prefer to foreclose with machetes. Declan stared intently at the screen, his eyes burning with a mixture of profound fatigue and unwavering focus. So that means he is desperate. He is drowning, Vivian corrected him sharply. He used his personal assets as the collateral for the loan. That includes his estate, his private yacht, and his entire stock portfolio. Excellent, Declan said with cold satisfaction. It is time to cut the strings. The assault commenced on a Tuesday morning. It was not a violent bombing. It was a precise and devastating digital assassination. At 9 ante meridiem, a whistleblower account secretly operated by Vivian leaked 5,000 internal emails from Caldwell Enterprises to the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The leaked emails contained detailed records of bribery paid to city zoning officials, information on safety violations that resulted in the deaths of 3 construction workers in 2022, and most damning of all, evidence of complex money laundering schemes directly connected to human trafficking rings operating in Eastern Europe. By 10 ante meridiem, Caldwell's corporate stock price had already plummeted by a staggering 40%. By 11:30 ante meridiem, the banks had moved to freeze every one of his credit lines. Declan calmly watched the unfolding chaos on the news feed. Hordes of reporters were swarming the base of Caldwell's office tower. Phase 1 is now complete, Vivian declared, casually popping a fresh piece of chewing gum into her mouth. He is bleeding out the cash he needs to pay for his protection. Declan rose from his chair and put on his jacket. He picked up his Sig Sauer from the desk. I will personally handle the muscle. Victor Costa was attempting to hide in plain sight. He was running his operations out of a large warehouse club in the Seaport district known as the Iron Curtain. The place was a fortress of cold concrete and garish neon, filled with pounding techno music and men who looked as if they had been carved from solid granite. Declan did not assemble an army. He brought only Kieran and Rocco, just the 3 of them against the world. They maneuvered the black sport utility vehicle directly up to the club's velvet rope. The bouncer, an enormous man with a prominent neck tattoo, moved to block their path. This is a private party, the bouncer grunted dismissively. Rocco offered no words in response. He simply drove his forehead into the man's face, shattering his nose with a sickening crunch, and then calmly stepped over the crumpled body. They strode into the club. Since it was the middle of the day, the cavernous space was mostly deserted, aside from a cleaning crew and a small group of Russians engrossed in a card game at a back table. Victor Costa was among them, sipping from a glass of vodka and staring at his phone with a deep, worried frown. The moment he looked up and saw Declan, he froze completely. He made no move to reach for his weapon. He just looked utterly bewildered. Declan Orr was supposed to be a broken man, consumed by grief, weak, and terrified. Declan walked directly to the table. The other Russians immediately rose to their feet. Their hands hovered cautiously near the weapons concealed in their jackets. Sit down, Declan commanded. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a certain frequency of contained violence that made the very air in the room feel heavy and thick. Costa gestured with his hand. His men reluctantly sat back down. Mr. O, Costa said, forcing a smile that did not come close to reaching his eyes. I was sorry to hear about your wife. A terrible tragedy. You have my condolences. Declan pulled out an empty chair and sat directly across from him. You were present that night, Victor. I was indeed at the party. Yes. A great many people were there. You shook my hand, Declan reminded him. You looked me directly in the eye. I am a polite man, he replied smoothly. Declan leaned farther across the table. Arthur Caldwell's financial accounts are all frozen. The triads are now calling to collect his debt. He has no way to pay you, Victor. Whatever compensation he promised you for the hit, the territory, the cash payments, it has all vanished. It is nothing but vapor now. Costa's manufactured smile finally faltered. He nervously checked his phone once more. He had undoubtedly seen the news reports by now. Business is business, Costa said with a shrug. trying to sound indifferent. Contracts are meant to be honored. Not when the client is effectively a corpse, Declan countered. I did not come here to kill you, Victor. At least, not today. No, Costa scoffed with a harsh laugh. You walk into my establishment with only 2 men. Do you truly believe you can just walk back out? I believe, Declan said calmly, that if you were to check your private bank account in the Cayman Islands, the specific one ending in the numbers 4490, you will discover that it is completely empty. The color drained from Costa's face. He began tapping furiously on his phone's screen. His complexion turned a dark shade of purple. Vivian says hello, Declan whispered across the table. She finished draining it 5 minutes ago, $2 million. That money is currently sitting in a charity account established for orphans. Costa shot to his feet, knocking his chair over with a loud crash. I am going to kill you! The Russians instantly drew their weapons. Kieran and Rocco immediately leveled their own in response. It was a standoff. You are presented with 2 choices, Declan said, remaining perfectly still in his chair. Choice A. You shoot me. My men will then shoot you. We will all die right here. And somewhere else, Caldwell will be laughing because he got his target eliminated without having to pay a single dime. And what is choice B? Costa hissed through clenched teeth. You will deliver a message for me, Declan said. You are going to tell Caldwell that I am prepared to negotiate. You will inform him that I know he is completely broke. Let him know that I am willing to purchase his shipping shares for pennies on the dollar, just enough to save him from the triads. Then you will tell him to meet me for dinner this evening. Costa just stared at him, his powerful chest heaving with rage and confusion. He was a mercenary through and through. His loyalty was never to Caldwell. It was only to the money. And Caldwell's money had just disappeared. Where? Costa finally asked, his voice low. The wine cellar at the Fairmont, Declan replied. You mean the place where my wife died? Costa slowly lowered his handgun. You are a truly crazy man, Orr. I am a widower, Declan said as he stood up from the table. We are capable of absolutely anything. The wine cellar of the Fairmont was an exclusive private dining room situated deep beneath the main hotel, encircled by countless vintage bottles worth more than the average house. The air was cool, the lighting was dim, and the space was profoundly silent. Declan took his seat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table. The entire room had been cleared of all hotel staff. At 8 post Meridium, the heavy oak doors swung open to reveal Arthur Caldwell. He entered the room looking like a man who had suffered a decade of hardship in just a few short hours. His expensive suit was a wrinkled mess, and his eyes darted nervously, scanning every corner. Victor Costa and 2 of Costa's imposing guards flanked him like wardens. Caldwell attempted to muster his typical air of arrogance. Declan, he said, his voice strained. This is quite unexpected. I assumed you would be in mourning. I am, Declan replied, his gaze gesturing to an empty chair at the far end of the long table. Please, sit. Caldwell took the seat. Costa remained standing directly behind him, his powerful arms crossed over his chest. It has been a difficult week for you, Arthur, Declan observed, calmly pouring a glass of water. A stock market disaster, federal indictments, and now the triads are demanding their payment. Minor complications, Caldwell scoffed, but the tremble in his hand as he reached for a piece of bread betrayed his fear. I possess resources that you could never comprehend. You have absolutely nothing left, Declan stated with chilling finality. Every one of your assets has been frozen solid. Your connections in the political world have all turned their backs on you. In fact, the governor released a public statement just an hour ago, creating as much distance as possible from your alleged criminal enterprises. Caldwell brought his fist down hard on the table. Enough games, O'Rourke. You said you were interested in buying my shares. So what is your offer? I require liquid assets before the sun rises tomorrow. I did not come here to purchase your shares, Arthur. Then for what reason are we here? "We are here," Declan explained, "to complete our dinner." With that, he reached beneath the table and produced a bottle. It was not just any bottle of wine. It was a 2012 vintage of Ballinger champagne, the very same kind that was served at the gala only 3 nights before. Caldwell's panicked eyes shot a look toward Costa. The enforcer's face was a mask of indifference. "I discovered something quite fascinating," Declan said as he uncorked the bottle with a gentle pop. "My wife, you see, she kept a journal. Were you aware of that? She was incredibly meticulous with her entries." Declan carefully poured the sparkling golden liquid into 2 separate glasses. "She was aware that you had hired Costa," Declan went on, sliding one of the glasses across the table to Caldwell. "She was aware of the binary poison. She even knew that you were observing everything from the balcony." Caldwell swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "This is an absurd fabrication. I am a respected businessman." "You are a murderer," Declan corrected him. "And you are a complete fool. You believed that killing me would grant you control of the port, but you were ignorant of the failsafe that Gloria had put into place. In the event of my death, the extensive files she compiled on your activities were programmed to be released automatically to every single federal agency in this nation. By murdering her instead, you inadvertently granted yourself 3 additional days of freedom." Declan lifted his own glass. "Drink up, Arthur. I am not touching that," Caldwell sneered with defiance. "I know what kind of man you are. If you choose not to drink it," Declan said, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper, "then the video recording of your meeting with the underage traffickers in Prague will be broadcast live to the world. Vivian has her finger poised over the enter key as we speak." Caldwell went completely still. All the color drained from his face, leaving him pale as a ghost. That was the one dark secret he believed was buried so deep that it could never be unearthed. This was not just about prison time. This was about total social ruin. It meant being torn to shreds by other inmates within the first hour of being processed. "You wouldn't dare," Caldwell whispered, his voice barely audible. "Drink," Declan commanded again, his tone leaving no room for argument. Caldwell stared at the glass of champagne. He looked desperately at Costa. "Victor, you must do something." Victor Costa did not so much as flinch. "My agreement was to eliminate O'Rourke. You failed to pay me for my services, and now you have no money left to offer." A cold smile spread across Costa's face. "At this moment, I am merely an observer." Caldwell's gaze returned to Declan. He was utterly trapped. Outside, the triads were waiting to slice him into pieces over his debt. The feds were waiting to place him under arrest. And here sat Declan, with that glass of champagne. "Is it?" Caldwell's voice trembled. "Is it poisoned?" Declan smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth, cold and dead. "Gloria drank from that bottle for me. It only seems just that you should drink from it for her." With a shaking hand, Caldwell picked up the glass. He was trembling so violently that some of the champagne sloshed over the rim. He understood in that moment that this was his only escape. A swift death inside a luxurious hotel room was far better than a slow, public, and excruciatingly painful downfall. Caldwell squeezed his eyes shut and drained the entire glass in a single, desperate gulp. He slammed the empty glass onto the table, gasping for air. He clutched at his throat, bracing for the paralysis to set in. He was waiting for the end to come. Declan watched him without a word. Costa watched him too. 1 full minute ticked by, then 2 minutes, then 3. Caldwell cautiously patted his own chest. He took a deep breath. He was not dying. "I do not understand," Caldwell stammered in confusion. I am still alive." Declan took a calm sip from his own glass. "Of course you are alive. I did not poison your drink, Arthur. I am not a monster like you." A wild, hysterical laugh escaped Caldwell's lips. "You bluffing son of a female dog. You never had the nerve to go through with it." He pushed his chair back and stood, his old confidence surging back. I am leaving this place. Costa, escort me out of here. We are heading for the airfield. Sit down, Costa said, his voice firm and cold. Excuse me, Caldwell snapped, turning to face him. The champagne was never poisoned, Declan explained, leaning back comfortably in his chair. But the handle on the door was. Caldwell froze in place. He slowly looked down at his right hand, the same hand he had used to pull open the massive oak door upon his arrival, the very same hand he had just used to hold the champagne glass. Dr. Orris explained the science to me, Declan said in a conversational tone. It is a binary agent. Part 1 is a lipid gel. It is absorbed directly through the skin. On its own, it is completely harmless. It merely primes the nervous system. Declan gestured with his head toward the empty champagne glass on the table. The second part, Declan continued, is alcohol. It functions as the catalyst. Once the alcohol enters the bloodstream and combines with the agent that has been absorbed through your skin, well, the entire process takes about 4 minutes. Caldwell stared at his hand in horror. A faint red rash was beginning to appear on his palm. No, Caldwell whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Gloria intercepted the poison that was meant for me, Declan said, his eyes welling with tears for the first time. She took my place to save me. But you, Arthur, you walked directly into her final trap. Caldwell's hands flew to his throat. He made a terrible choking sound as his legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed back into his chair. His eyes bulged from their sockets. He tried to form words, but his diaphragm was already paralyzed. They say it is painless, Declan said, getting to his feet and walking over to the dying man. He leaned in, his mouth close to Caldwell's ear. But I sincerely hope they are wrong. Caldwell's body convulsed a single time before he slumped forward, lifeless, onto the polished mahogany table. He was dead. The room fell into a heavy silence. Declan turned his gaze to Costa. Are we settled? Costa asked, his eyes on the corpse. Remove him from my sight, Declan ordered. Dispose of his body in the harbor. Let the crabs feast on him. And as for the triads, inform them that the debt has been paid in full by the O'Rourke family, Declan declared. I am assuming control of his territory. The port now belongs to me. Costa gave a nod of respectful understanding. He motioned to his men. They quickly wrapped Arthur Caldwell's body in the expensive tablecloth and unceremoniously dragged him from the room. Declan was finally alone in the cellar. He took the champagne bottle and poured the remaining contents onto the stone floor. This is for you, Gloria, he whispered to the empty room. The funeral was the most significant event Boston had witnessed since the days of the Kennedy family. A sea of hundreds of black umbrellas filled the cemetery grounds, as senators, mob bosses, and common dock workers all stood side by side in the rain. Declan stood near the open grave, his expression silent and unreadable. Kieran was at his side, his loyalty fully restored. Just as the coffin was being lowered into the earth, Declan's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text message from a number he did not recognize. There were no words, only a live video stream. The feed showed a bright, sunny cafe somewhere in Paris. A woman wearing large sunglasses slowly lowered her newspaper, looked straight into the camera, and then tapped the side of her nose. Declan's heart felt like it stopped beating. It was tetrodotoxin, the infamous zombie poison. Gloria had not simply died to protect him from his enemies. She had died in order to escape. In one brilliant move, she had eliminated all leverage against him, completely destroyed their shared foes, and then she had vanished like a phantom. The video feed suddenly went black. A slow, truly genuine smile began to spread across Declan's face for the first time in days. She was gone from his life, a ghost that he could never hope to pursue. But she was alive and free. Declan, Kieran whispered, concern in his voice. Are you all right? I am better than fine, Declan answered, placing a single white rose on the lid of the empty casket. He turned to face his men. The entire city was now his to command. but the truest victory belonged to the queen who was watching them all from Paris. "Let us go," Declan commanded. "Do not ruin my evening." And that is the incredible story of Declan and Gloria O'Rourke. It is a tale that proves you can never truly know the person sleeping beside you. Gloria was a woman who transformed herself into a weapon to shield the man she loved, even when he failed to appreciate her. She was engaged in a complex game of four-dimensional chess, while everyone around her was merely playing checkers, orchestrating her own death to bring down an entire empire and claim her own freedom. In the end, Declan may have gained all the power, but Gloria secured the one thing that money could never purchase: a brand new beginning. If you were captivated by this Mafia saga full of twists and turns, please hit that like button with everything you have got. It genuinely helps our channel to grow and reach more people. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon so that you are always notified of a new story. Please share this with a friend who appreciates a really good thriller. So what is your opinion? Did Gloria make the correct choice by leaving Declan behind to start over? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and thought-provoking storytelling. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.